For the first time, Japanese researchers have conducted a real-life experiment that shows how some traffic jams appear for no apparent reason. They placed the 22 vehicles on a single track and asked the drivers to cruise around at a constant speed of 30 kilometers an hour. At first, traffic moved smoothly, but soon the distance between cars started to vary, and vehicles clumped together at one point on the track. But the jam spread backward around the track, like a shockwave, at a rate of about 20 kilometers an hour. Real-life jams move backward at about the same speed.
I'm going to argue that the tremendous increases in productivity that we associate with the Industrial Revolution originate not so much from changes in science or technology or new inventions, where England was far from unique, as from changes in attitudes towards morality, towards what constituted the good, attitudes towards property, which became in England individualized long before it did on the continent, attitudes towards the proper form of government. And together, these attitudes constitute much of what the Luddites were protesting against. In this tutorial, we will show you how to find specific journal articles using the library catalog. The university subscribes to over 18,000 journals across a variety of subjects, most of which are available electronically. To find a specific journal article using the library catalog, we need to search by the journal name, as individual article titles are not listed in the catalog.
Now, that story's been scotched as only part of contingency planning, but it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother, considering that the vast majority of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realised? Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of a hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty.
Brooke and her colleague Mark Newman studied who swapped messages with whom on a popular online dating platform in the month of January 2014. They categorized users by desirability using PageRank, one of the algorithms behind search technology. Essentially, if you receive a dozen messages from desirable users, you must be more desirable than someone who receives the same number of messages from average users. And then they asked, how far out of their league do online daters tend to go when pursuing a partner?
I think people are optimistic realists.
In other words, they found that both men and women tended to pursue mates just 25% more desirable than themselves.
So they're being optimistic, but they're also taking into account their own relative position within this overall desirability hierarchy.
All the graphs and charts are in the journal Science Advances. And the study did have a few more lessons for people on the market.
I think one of the take-home messages from the study is women could probably afford to be more aspirational in their mate pursuit.
The ocean has been getting bluer, according to a study published today in the journal Nature. But that's not really good news for the planet. It means that the plants that tinge the ocean green aren't doing so well. Scientists say that's because the ocean has been getting warmer.
In animals, a movement is coordinated by a cluster of neurons in the spinal cord called the Central Patterns Generator, CPG. This produces signals that drive muscles to contract rhythmically in a way that produces running or walking, depending on the pattern of pulses. A simple signal from the brain instructs the CPG to switch between modes, such as going from a standstill to walking.
And that brings us to the CEO's second duty, building the everyone, or more accurately, building the senior team. All the executives report to the CEO, so it is the CEO's job to hire, fire, and manage the executive team. From coaching CEOs, I actually think this is the most important skill of all, because when a CEO hires an excellent senior team, that team can keep the company running. When a CEO hires a poor senior team, the CEO ends up spending all of their time trying to deal with the team and not nearly enough time trying to do the other elements of their job. The senior team can and often does develop the strategy for the company, but ultimately it's always the CEO who has the final go, no-go decision on strategy.
There are some 250 million cars in America, 250 million cars in a country with just over 300 million people. And most of those vehicles, of course, are gas-powered. This poses a huge challenge given the limited supplies of oil and the growing urgency of the global warming crisis. But there's good news, according to our guests today, and that is we have the know-how and the technology to build sleek, fast automobiles that don't use gasoline. These vehicles of tomorrow are powered by hydrogen, electricity, biofuels, and digital technology, and they already exist. So what's stopping us from putting them on the roads? Our guest today will help answer that.
For a long time now, it's been a widely accepted and rarely questioned belief that a strong corporate culture goes hand in hand with success. However, a recent study has caused some doubt of this principle. Although some of the court argue that the culture a company builds up may be strong but wrong, there is a point in every employee market to the same tune, if they are all marching in the wrong direction.
For many years, the favorite horror story about abrupt climate change was that a shift in ocean currents could radically cool Europe's climate. These currents, called the overturning circulation, bring warm water and warm temperatures north from the equator to Europe. Susan Lozier, an oceanographer at Duke University, says scientists have long worried that this ocean circulation could be disrupted.
WinterCam only does one thing. We provide housing and aged care services to older homeless men and women. Along the way, we have built unashamedly beautiful buildings, 2 of which have won and been runner-up in the prestigious United Nations World Habitat Award. The first time an Australian building has received that international honor. We rely on older concepts of Australian architecture that are heavily influenced by the bush. All residents have private verandas, which allows them to socialize outdoors and also creates some defensible space between their bedrooms and public areas. We use a lot of natural soft materials and build beautiful landscaped gardens.
rebuilding carbon-rich agricultural soils is the only real, productive, permanent solution to taking excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
She's frustrated that scientists and politicians don't see the same opportunities she sees.
This year Australia will emit just over 600 million tonnes of carbon. We can sequester 685 million tonnes of carbon by increasing soil carbon by 0.5% on only 2% of the farms. If we increased it on all of the farms, we could sequester the whole world's emissions of carbon.
Behind it?
Well, in 2004 we integrated ticketing in southeast Queensland, so we introduced a paper ticket that allowed you to travel across all the three modes in southeast Queensland, so bus, train and ferry. And the second stage of integrated ticketing is the introduction of a smart card. And the smart card will enable people to store value, so to put value on the card and then to use the card for travelling around the system.
And one particular crop, almonds in the US and now in Australia, is transforming the world of beekeeping and of bees.
What has happened is something serendipitous came along that people found out, or doctors found out, that almonds are good for you. They're actually a food that is normally considered a confection, but it's good for you. The Almond Board got a very aggressive promotion going on for almonds. They actually, I just heard recently, send out sales reps to cardiologists at hospitals to promote the heart benefits of almonds. So they go right to the doctors to do this. So they leave no stone unturned in a very good promotion of almonds, and it's a legitimate promotion because they are a healthy food. So what's happened is worldwide, almond sales have taken off.
You've heard about SARS, AIDS and bird flu. Now researchers from Australia claim we're about to be hit by a new epidemic, motivational deficiency disorder.
According to the British Medical Journal, 1 in 5 people are said to suffer from motivational deficiency disorder, or MODID, and most don't even know they have it. Symptoms include being unable to get out of bed in the morning, being trapped on the couch, or wanting to spend the entire day at the beach.
Well, the simple explanation might be that yesterday's sudden drop in share prices pretty much across the board has created what market analysts like to call a buying opportunity. It tends to bring out investors to pick through the ruins looking for bargains. What seems to be happening today is this decision by investors that sellers got a little carried away with things. So the buyers have lifted all the major indexes today. The Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P 500 were all up around 0.5% in early trading today, and that wasn't a big surprise. The sell-off continued somewhat overseas, but you could watch things stabilize abroad. European markets remained fairly weak, along with many of the Asian markets. But you'll remember that all this started with a big plunge of around 9% on the stock market in Shanghai, while Chinese stocks rebounded by around 4%, and that kind of set the tone.
My current research at the moment is really quite broad. I work at the interface between the arts and humanities, particularly archaeology, but trying to find questions which are very difficult to answer unless you start integrating computing and visualization. So really I work at this boundary between trying to understand cultural questions about the past, but those sorts of questions which you can't address unless you start reconstructing, start modelling and visualising past landscapes, objects and movement of people.
prepared and collected by PT Harper.
It is about 100 years since that great Canadian-born physician, Sir William Osler, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, complained about the increasing influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the medical profession. If he knew how this influence had increased since then, he would be turning in his grave at the way the industry now dominates doctors' prescribing habits. It does this not only by direct and indirect pressure on the doctors themselves, but also by encouraging the public to ask for scripts and to demand that governments provide the money.